If I was to tap on this row, you would expect to be pushed to the detail view. However, watch this. Notice that the animation was different. The hero image, along with the title and the subtitle, expanded into the full detail view of the recipe. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to be leveraging matchedGeometryEffect and namespace from SwiftUI to make our app feel more vibrant when transitioning to the detail of the recipe. This is what we had in the previous video. It was just a navigation stack with a list. Inside we have a detail view, and this is what we are going to change. Let's start with the list, but in the meantime, I'm going to use Claude to create the detail view in the meantime. Create the recipe detail overlay view. This will have 3 parameters. One is a recipe, a namespace.id, and then on this means closure that returns a void. The body should be a C stack that has a scroll view, and inside it will have a V stack with a C stack again, a rounded rectangle, an image, a V stack that contains 2 texts, one for the recipe title and one for the recipe subtitle. Then we'll have another V stack with the recipe cooking time and number of servings, followed by the list of ingredients, which for now will just be something temporary. At the end, it will have a button to dismiss the image. So let's let that think for a while. And in the meantime, we'll change this. So instead of having a list, and keep in mind, we're using matchedGeometryEffect, so we do not want to use a list. Why? Because list relies on UI table view and it doesn't play well with those animations custom animations that we want to create. So instead, we will use a scroll view. So we will receive a recipe and it will receive a namespace that we will use for our animation. Let's create that namespace right now. And I will also create a state, which is the selected recipe, the recipe that the user tapped and that we're showing the detail for. We'll be adding a tap gesture to the recipe, and let's leave it like that. Let's remove the list and the navigation destination. Since we're no longer navigating to the recipe view, we'll actually get rid of that view. So as you saw, we declared 2 variables when we were trying to use the recipe hero card, which is the recipe, and the namespace. So this recipe hero card, this is just basically the row. There, and now we have our row. Now let's move this to the previous file. And here we have our rows. And oh, I think I applied the class effect to the wrong view. Yeah, better. Did this one, and we're missing also a bit of padding. Okay, now that we have our hero card, let's complete our tap gesture. So we will be animating, showing the recipe detail. We'll start with a spring animation. The only reason why I know these values is I did a little bit of testing before recording these videos. And the only thing that we will animate is selecting the recipe. Why? Because in another part in the code we'll add a condition where if there's an selected recipe that's not nil, we'll add an overlay. And that's what we'll be animating with a matchedGeometryEffect. So if there's a selected recipe, here's where we show our detail view, which Claude should be creating. Now let's start modifying some stuff here. Claude did more than we wanted here. We do not want the ingredients just yet. move the button away and change it to, instead of a text, an image. We will add the ignore safe area so the image goes on top of the status bar. Into the background of the entire view, we will add a regular material. And there we have our detail view. Now, one thing we want to do is add this as an overlay now. See, there we have, and notice what happened. When I tap here, this is not what we want. We want a match geometry effect, which what would do is when we tap here, the elements would seem to be the same as this view. And how will we do this animation where it seems that the image, the title and the subtitle moves from that view to this view with match geometry effect? What that modifier does is it animates the view's frame position and size between two locations in the same view hierarchy. That's very important, and that's why we're not using navigation link anymore. Also why we're using the namespace here inside of the recipe list view and not inside of the recipe hero card. We need the namespace to be the same. That's how the system knows that it has to render these objects. So let's go around and start adding this method. Now on to using match geometry effect on the items that we want. So which are the items? It's the image and these two texts. So we'll do it before the size because this is what we are matching. So for the ID, we will be using, well, the recipe ID, but since we're having three different things, we need to have three different IDs. It cannot just be the recipe ID. So that'll be the card. Then here we add the namespace. And if we look at the declaration, there's more things. One is the property, the other is the anchor. We're not going to touch those two. And the other one is source. For now, the three that I'm going to add right now, we're going to leave it with the default, meaning we're declaring that this is the source, which is true. The row is the source of the effect. Well, we did add it for the image. Now for the title and the subtitle of the recipe. We're still missing adding that same match geometry effect to our detail. So we'll start adding the match geometry. Oh, the rectangle. I think I forgot that one. Yeah, I added the card, but not to the image itself. Sorry about that. This will not be the card. This will be the icon. Okay, it was actually 4 items. So one of them, again, it will be the rectangle. So this is what we use. We use card, namespace, and remember, we cannot leave is source as true. One of the two needs to be false. Oh, okay. Clearly we don't have what we want. The hero image is not scrolling and the close button is a little bit too much to the top. That's because we're ignoring the safe area. However, not what we want with the entire content. Let's see if we can fix this. That should do it. And now that I think about it, the other reason is, although we are specifying, hey, this is the source, we're not hiding the source, meaning that when we navigate here, the source is still in the background. Notice that the image is not moving. Well, that's because the source is still there. So let's hide the source. Right? Ah, that's a much better effect. There we have it. Everything else is scrolling. We have our close button and we have our list here. It looks much more livelier and we still keep that glass effect. Okay, I thought everything was working now, but upon testing it from the content view, you will notice that we once again run into the scrolling issue. That's again part of the fact that we're showing this over the navigation stack. We can overcome this if we add it here inside of the navigation stack. However, this will present another problem, which is once we start scrolling, the navigation title appears here with the overlay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna move this overlay outside. Now if we go to our content view, now we have the animation that we wanted. That was part 2 of our recipes app video. We transform our simple recipes list to one that has hero cards that seem to expand to a full detail view thanks to matchedGeometryEffect alongside with namespace. This required replacing list with lazy vstack and for each, but as you can see, the effort was minimal. And in return, we now have some fancy animations when expanding. See you next time. Bye.